it's been another week, another Wednesday, another episode of The Bad Batch, and after 2 episodes of filler, we've finally gotten it back to normal. Well, what we're getting is something really interesting. The mass enslavement of the Wookiees, and the fact of the Wookiee Jedi we saw in the early Clone Wars. In one particular Clone Wars episode, which I forget the name of, as it was some time ago. But suffice it to say, we've got a Wookiee Jedi again in canon, after Legends. And the other thing is, I think, is the fact of how the episode starts off. We know for a fact that the Bad Batch have been doing a lot of criminal underlying work, and in this case, we're seeing once again the blockchain technology and chain codes that were previously demonstrated via another episodes such as Andor and the first season of Bad Batch, in which is the technology being used by the Empire to log everyone's identity and movements as a means of asserting their control. So that was pretty interesting, to say the least. And the fact that Tech whipped up a fresh batch for a smuggler so he could use them completely covertly. But the episode starts off, oddly enough, with Echo sort of exploring the facility after getting bored. And there's also the fact that the smugglers were robots or droids, which is something a bit interesting. Okay, we know for a fact that droids can be sentient, but I wonder if the fact this is either just a fact he might even be a cyborg. Well, we may never know, but that's just an interesting side detail. The best moment about the whole episode, I think, was the fact of Omega really discovering her moral compass here. She's seen slavery firsthand and decides it's bad, and so she decides to save a Wookiee who turns out to be a Jedi, which was very intriguing, I must say, as well. The fact that no one ever realised it. There's also the fact that we know for a fact that Ahsoka and a few other Jedi and Obi-Wan survived Order 66, and there might be a few others as well. But how long they stay active will largely depend on whether or not they fall to the dark side or not. The other interesting thing is the fact we're finally seeing the Imperial occupation of Kashyyyk, and the fact that Kashyyyk is a resource-rich planet that in many cases has been exploited in the past. Seeing it firsthand. And the fact we know from Rebels that the Trandoshans and the Wookiees have a long-standing conflict. And the Trandoshans have often been used as slavers. So there's that as well. And they're working with the Empire in order to get them. The Empire is using the Trandoshans' tracking abilities to hunt them down. And most likely, quite possibly, as payment for their services, the Trandoshans are probably getting a number of slaves that they can sell on the black market, given the fact of Wookiees' incredible strength and power and usefulness in things like the spice mines of Kessel. Which, much like the Empire helped fund, will also have the Empire gets a whole lot of strong labourers for its growing military-industrial complex. The other thing I think was a bit interesting was the fact that we're using AATs, which is something a bit odd. I know for a fact there were plenty of AATs in reasonable working order, but the fact they use them experiment means that most likely the fact the Empire, in order to raise funds for its developing military, has been selling off not Republic equipment, but Separatist equipment to whoever can afford it, or maybe quite possibly these Trandoshans were in the pay of the Separatists initially, and then switched sides when the war began, and the Empire just let them keep the tanks. That's quite possibly needed these vehicles, and quite possibly repulsive if they're able to move much better through the urban jungle than the dense foliage than, say, a walker. But the world of it, and the fact that Wookiees are going deeper into the jungle, and the Empire and the Trandoshans are burning it in order to gain access to the raw resources, despite the fact that Wookiees wood is actually quite durable. I mean, the Wookiees use it to make a starship of all things. So is that, so it's quite strong, but I think possibly outside of luxury use, I think what the Empire really wants is the raw mineral wealth of Kashyyyk, as that is something I think the Empire was doing on other planets. And we also know for a fact that it's growing quite deep, and we also see the fact that I think what was quite interesting, the fact that Wrecker embraces full in with the Wookiee culture, pretty much taking the entire basis of what might have been a Wookiee drink of some kind, which might have been alcohol, and the fact that at the end of the episode Echo decides to help himself, and goes, but Ashley says it's not bad. Yeah, it's probably, but I think it might be booze. Or something along those lines, because of the fact of, it's probably something that's quite tasty that the Wookiees drink. It might be Wookiee booze, yet again it might not be. And there's also the fact, I think, the best bit of thing about the episode, I think, was the fact that Hunter maybe realised the fact that Omega is growing up. And she's growing up in more ways than one. And the fact that the values, but she's learning her own morals and values, and may serve a key role in things to come. I think the other good thing, I think, was also the fact that we're also seeing the fact of exactly how the underworld works. Like, for example, some crime syndicates primarily use droids for their operations, or a droid base. It makes me think the fact that there are some droids who have gone rogue, and the fact that also there are some droids who can't handle the abilities of their forebears, so they keep dying. Another thing is also the fact that with every Wookiee and every job done, is also the fact that we know for a fact the Empire is building up a large stockpile of slaves and prison labour for its military-industrial complex. I mean, there's not that much people that can actually build it. They've got such a military appetite for military equipment. Anything from I think some sort of industrial servo mechanism to lenses amongst other stuff, that it's becoming very expensive. And of course, Wookiees are known for their incredible strength and their fine workmanship with their hands, which makes them very good in industry, from heavy lifting to constructing finely made objects. Another thing I think I also found quite good about the episode, I think it's just the fact that Hunter knows the fact that Omega's going to do alright. Other than the fact we've seen Wrecker just being Wrecker. And also the fact I think it's also the fact of one of the gadgets that Tech has is a language translator built into his helmet, which can read anything from complex such as Wookiee speak to, which we know for a fact that humans can understand, because Han Solo can speak basic and Chewie can understand basic. But the trouble is, I think, because the way that many species' voice boxes are shaped, they have difficulty making the sounds of a Wookiee, which probably leads to the fact of, I think, translation. So Wookiees can understand basic, but they can't speak it, given the way their voices, the sounds they make, which is quite something interesting about science fiction, the fact that different aliens, they might be able to understand each other's languages, but won't be able to speak them, given the way their vocal cords and how they speak varies from person to person. I mean, the Protoss don't have mouths, but they probably most likely understand human language, and they may have an ear, or they hear human thoughts, and then of course that's the way they speak, which probably might be quite jarring. But outside of that, it was quite good to see the fact of the slaving operation, and also think the fact that we're back to like the Empire being Empire again, or also going into the underworld. And I think might mean that the next episode is going to be a bit much, so they realise the Bad Batch is there, and we're also probably I think this might be a theory, but I think Omega, somewhere on the line, if Bad Batch gets to season 3, or at the end, Omega might play a key role in the rebellion, in the early rebellion, given the fact of what she's seen and she's no friend of the Empire. She's seen what the Empire is going to do firsthand. And her idealism, and her, I think, her just willingness to help people, coupled with the fact the values that she's been taught about loyalty, duty, courage, and everything else that she's learned from the Bad Batch, who are soldiers and integrity, is going to mean the fact she's going to be very, very active in the early rebellion. I think that's just my theory when the rebellion starts. Omega will play a role somewhere along the lines, probably using the blockchain method or chain code method used by Tech to forge identities for herself and others. And I think also become a key weapon smuggler. She might even adopt false identities. But if the fact she's she's the blonde woman in Andor, I don't know. It's 19 years between the fall and start of the Empire to the Battle of Yavin. And Omega, and I think this takes place a few years before that. And I think Omega is around about 10, 12, 11 or 12, 13 at the oldest during Star Wars Bad Batch. I mean, this takes place in like the months after the Clone Wars, so assuming the fact she doesn't age as clones do, she would probably be a fair bit older than that. Given for a fact by that point that Rex and his clone buddies were fat old men with beards, living out their days in a retirement home, spending their days fishing. Yeah, so there's that as well. But got involved with the rebellion not long after that, so she might age as Boba Fett did. She might have been a backup plan in case of a backup clone host. She might have been grown from, she might have been a product of someone as a child, or maybe the fact they just decided to cover their investment and just took Jango's DNA and quite possibly maybe, I think, because that might be one of Kamina's product lines, were designer babies for rich clients. And in this case, they took Jango Fett's DNA and maybe mixed it with someone else's to create Omega, and in this case, just decided that was what the client wanted, but they never took delivery. So as a result, Omega was left lying about. Or maybe she might have another purpose. I never really understood it myself. But enough of that. But I think in terms of overall, this episode was very nice as well. I think we've seen a new model of droid. And given the way the Bad Batch is done, everything from like separatist holdouts to the Empire's attempts to gain control across the galaxy, this is really going to come into its own as time goes by. It's setting up a very nice chain of events to the build-up of the rebellion and the fall of the Empire. I just wish beyond anything we got something now after Episode 9. I know, it wasn't the best thing, but the galaxy's in chaos by this point. The New Republic's gone, and the First Order, I think, it was never around to stay. So whatever stands up in its place, I think that's going to be an interesting political story. I only say that because I think it would be. Well, I've been the Universal Challenger, so please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheerio!